is Superman, and I am in one of Kirkle's buildings at 101 West Big Beaver. And Alan Kerlak is one of the owners of that building, and he is definitely a Superman. So apparently while I was cruising back in March down the Panama Canal, somebody on my floor came down with the virus. The entire floor was closed, completely cleaned, and reopened for us in a safe environment. So if you're looking for a new landlord, I would suggest that you look a little deeper into the reputation of the landlord. There are a lot of great landlords here in the Troy area and the Detroit area. He just happens to be my landlord. So that's why I picked to talk about him. All right, next slide. The other thing I want to do is I want to honor some of our heroes today. You know, we have the doctors, but now we have the janitorial people, the police, the grocery stores, and then there's Dan Gilbert. And he's always been a great landlord, but did you know that he offered every one of his tenants 3 months free rent when this whole thing got started? Wow, what a great thing to do. What a great landlord to have. So he is also in the Superman category from my perspective. Okay, so we're going to talk about a three-step approach in order to possibly get your rent reduced. It's not going to guarantee it, but it's worth going through the efforts to see what you can do. So first, we're going to talk about reviewing your lease terms. We're going to talk about collecting financial information and how to strategize. And then lastly, following up with your landlord to see what you can do about your rent. So first we're going to do is you need to pull out your lease. Hopefully you know where it's at. If you don't, you should have a copy of it in a safe, and you should also have a copy online so you can access it anywhere. So when you pull out the lease, we're going to look for the lease, then we're going to look for a commencement letter, which I'll explain a little bit later, and any amendments. So first thing we want to do is we want to find out when that lease expires. And this is critical because I'll be talking more about how that makes a difference in how you approach your landlord. So, and we're going to go through some actual examples of figuring things out. If you had a commencement letter, which we'll talk about in a minute, you'll need to pull that document too to determine your lease expiration date, which I'll talk about in a minute again. Then we want to know if you have any renewal options, the right to extend your lease term, and you want to know what the requirements are to notify your landlord and what the rental rates will be. Excuse me. Some of you, very lucky ones, may have a termination option. You would need to, which basically gives you the right to cancel the lease at a certain time under certain conditions, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then before you do anything else, I would strongly suggest you go on to LoopNet, or you can contact us. I'll have some resources for you at the end of this talk about what the rental rates are in your market, because you want, if you're paying $2 to $3 a square foot more than the market for your building, you need to know that before you contact your landlord. Okay, so here are the list of dates I talked about. So in this case, I had a start date. Oops, that's wrong. It should have been, I've got that wrong there. It's not the expiration date, it's the start date. I'm gonna have to fix that, I'm sorry. The start date for your lease was February 1st, 2018, but the landlord wasn't able to deliver that to you on time, so he delivered it to you, or she delivered it to you on March 1st, 2018. So that is the start date of your lease. And it's important to have that commencement letter to make sure that that happened, that you understand those terms. Now you're going to look, how many months is your lease? Well, in this case, we have a 65-month lease. So what we're going to do now is we're going to figure out when our lease expires. So in this case, we're going to use 3/1/2018. We're going to add 65 months to that. And that means our lease expires 7/31/2025. And then you're going to look at your renewal option. You have 3 years and it is at market rate. And then you need to also look at the date, if you have an option to renew, when you have to exercise that option. And in this case, it says 6 months before the lease expiration, you have to exercise that option. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the termination option. Some landlords will give unusual circumstances, like a government entity would be a perfect example of that, the ability to cancel their lease because the federal government can't enter into long-term leases without the option to cancel. There might be something else. Perhaps you've won a contract, you're an industrial client, an industrial tenant, and you've won a contract, and the contract is only for 5 years, but you signed a 7-year lease. So the landlord might say to you, okay, I'll give you the 7-year term, but the right to cancel at 5 years. When you have that right to cancel, typically the option date is very specific, and it generally requires some cost, typically unamortized commissions and improvements. So you want to make sure you understand what those costs are, and if you're in the timeline where you can cancel that. Okay, so now we're going to go to collecting the financial information. So before you get on that call with your landlord, go through these questions and get them organized in your mind and being able to answer these questions. So one of the things your landlord's probably going to ask you is, how much money did your organization make? So you better have a P&L there so you can discuss it with the landlord. Landlord's also going to know, are you able to make any money during this crisis? I got to tell you, for commercial realtors, we were told we can't go show buildings, but I've actually been working harder now since I've been working at home than I was before. Landlord's probably going to want to know, how much rent can you pay? Perhaps you've gotten a PPP and you've got some money there that will help you pay the rent. They may also want to know when you could pay the rent back. And the other thing you really need to know, the landlord's going to want to know, is, are you essential service? So are you people working in the building, basically? Then they're probably going to want to know, did you make any applications for federal programs or grants? And they want to know which if you did, which ones did you apply for, and did you get the money back? Did you get the money? And then they probably want to know about your staff. Is your staff currently in the building, or are they working from home? Or did you shut down the business and everybody's laid off? And if you shut the business down, how are you going to reopen that business, and how long will it take for you to be profitable? Okay, so now we're going to talk about strategies. I've got basically 4 or 5 here. The biggest one is what we call a rent deferment. Rent deferment means the landlord's not going to collect rent from you now, but you have to pay it at some later date. A rent deferment, if you have 18 months or longer, is probably the most likely situation the landlord's going to agree to. So they might say, okay, I'll give you 3 months free rent now, but we'll either extend the term of the lease, or maybe you'll pay this in small increments over the next year. So you have to have a due date and agree on when that would be paid back. Then some other options here would be, tell the landlord how much you can pay. Landlord has operating expenses. Maybe if you could cover half the rent and then they're covering their expenses are still going out, maybe they'll agree. You also have most likely a security deposit. In fact, some tenants have more than 1 month security deposit. Ask the landlord if you can use that security deposit now as rent and then pay that back at a later date. You can also ask for rent forgiveness. Some landlords will do this, some will not. I was kind of shocked. I actually was told 3 days ago that my landlord was going to give me 2 months free rent. I didn't ask for it. It just came out of nowhere. So some of the landlords are being more proactive than other landlords. So, and it also depends on your landlord's financial condition, frankly. Now, if you have a lease that's expiring within the next 18 months, there's a great option, and we call it a blend and extend. So how this works is that, let's say that your lease expires in a year from right now. Let's say it expires, or let's just make it easier. Let's say it expires 2/1/21. Okay, now you can say, hey, Mr. Landlord, I'm willing to extend my lease by 3, 5, or 7 years. Now, in exchange, I would like 1 month free rent for every year I extend my lease term. So basically, you're asking for an incentive now to extend your term, which means that you're going to have to sign a new amendment for that greater term. I've had pretty good success with this process with my clients that have less than 18 months. And the reason I'm having success is the value of the building is based upon the rental roll, and the length of the lease increases the value of the building. So the landlords want to extend your lease because if they need to be refinancing that building in the next year or two, that gives them, it makes it much easier for them to do that. One thing too, down here I have, if you are asking the landlord just to extend your lease for 1 year, it has very little value to them. But they might. I think that's, you really need to do a 3 or 5 year renewal extension, an extension, not a renewal, in order to get the extra money. All right, so here's just some thoughts before you contact that landlord. You can use a commercial agent like myself or an attorney. I would suggest you use both, but you can certainly go it on your own. The other thing too, I want to bring up about attorneys, whenever you're doing any legal deals, real estate deals in particular, you should have a commercial real estate attorney review that document. And the difference, somebody's asked me, between a commercial agent and a attorney is a commercial agent's job is to address all the business terms in the lease, and the attorney's job is to protect the tenant from any being hurt legally, I guess. The other thing, another reason you would like to look at your lease, whoops, sorry, I went back. Uh-oh, backwards. I don't know how to get backwards. Sorry about that. Previous. Okay, sorry. Okay, just some other things to think about. Did I get through all those? Oh yeah, okay. When you get, sorry about that, when you have your lease, it's really important that you read that entire lease, because there might be some things in there that A, you don't understand, or B, you would like to renegotiate. So if you're doing an extension of your lease, it is a good time to renegotiate those things now. One client that I just did this for, there was a problem with the toilets in the common areas, and we got all that fixed, and we got them new carpet, and we got them free rent. So go back through the lease and see if there's anything that needs to be replaced. Another thing that's really critical is, remember, your landlord has a mortgage or a bond. They may or may not be able to get themselves out of paying the mortgage. And if they're tight for cash, they may not be able to assist you, and it's simply not because they're trying to be mean or rude. They just don't have the means to do so. So, you know, it's important to be respectful to your landlord as you go through this, understanding they're probably in financial, issues too. Another thing to remember is if you're a major tenant in the building, you have a lot more leverage. Conversely, if you're a tenant whose rent is late, landlord's not going to give you any free rent. I wouldn't even bother. I'd be talking to the landlord about how you're going to catch up on your rent. This is a question, I was at another seminar that I thought was really interesting. Someone said, okay, well, if I default on my rent and the landlord evicts me and I go to court and I personally guarantee this lease, I'm not going to have to pay this money back because I'm in default. Not necessarily. Actually, what this attorney said at this meeting is the judge's job is to follow the letter of the law. And if you haven't followed the letter of the law here with your lease, you're not going to get any sympathy, because the judges don't give sympathy. Just watch Judge Judy and you'll know all about that. But they also said that if you had addressed your landlord, like I'm suggesting, in a very professional manner, and you weren't able to come to a conclusion, you might get some sympathy from a judge. So anyways, that's what I heard. So take that or leave it. Okay, so before you contact your landlord, here are just some things I want you to think about. You know, the whole point here, oops. Okay. Okay, so went 2 pages again. Okay, so you want to call your landlord directly. And the reason I would prefer that you call them directly as opposed to sending them an email is A, emails get lost, and B, people hide behind emails. But if you're calling the landlord and say, hey, landlord, you know, I'm sorry, this is what's going on. Here's my proposal. That's going to be taken totally different than if you just send an email, because people can read emails based upon their mood. So if they're in a good mood, they might take it well. If they're in a bad mood, they might take it poorly. So I suggest giving them a call, and you want to bring up, listen, here's my financial situation. Here's what I made last year. Go through all those figures we talked about. Come up with a proposal for your landlord. I would like to have 3 months free rent now. I can pay it back like this, or I want to do a blend and extend. Be ready to negotiate. Just because you put out an offer there to the landlord doesn't mean they're going to take it. But do not be ridiculous. Do not say, I'm not paying rent for the next year. You're going to get nowhere with that discussion. So, you know, be careful, be respectful. And once you're done with the call, request the landlord to prepare a lease amendment. Unless you have an amendment, nothing is agreed to. And then as soon as you hang up from that call, I want you to send them an email and say, dear Mr. Landlord, these are the terms we agreed upon, and you're going to be preparing an amendment. This is what it's going to say, and it's going to be to me by this date. So basically, in conclusion, before you contact your landlord, do your homework, do some research on your dates for your lease, review your financials, come up with a proposal, and be proactive when negotiating with your landlord. And this page is providing you a bunch of resources on our website. And by the way, Sheila's going to be sending this, or somebody's going to be sending this to all of the listeners if you want to see this in this document. What I've got here is on our website. These are the URLs. I've got a current office rental rate, so you can see what the rental rates are in the market and the vacancy rates in all the buildings. I've got the same thing for industrial buildings. Now in industrial buildings, you need to be a little bit more careful, because what people don't understand in industrial buildings is the percentage of office to warehouse makes a big difference in the cost, and also the height of the ceiling, also in cranes and specialty equipment. But this will at least give you some idea. You can also use LoopNet, where you might be able to do a little more research and find buildings that are exactly the same as your building. We have a space calculator on our website. Basically, if you want to know how much space you're going to need when you go back to work, you can actually go in there. It's got pictures of all the different types of space, like an office or a conference room, and you just put all the numbers in there and it tells you how many square feet you need. We have a newsletter. If you'd like to sign up, we share information every single month on commercial real estate. And I would love to connect with you. Here's my URL for LinkedIn, for Compass's LinkedIn, and then this is our Facebook account. And then this article down here on the bottom, the Society of Office Industrial Realtors actually published this article 2 days ago. It is a great article. It covers many more things than I've talked about here. So take a look at that if you want. Just go ahead and just grab that if you'd like it. And last but not least, like Sheila said, I wrote a book called Do You Speak Lease? The reason I wrote the book is I can't help everybody. I'm not everywhere. And frankly, some people would prefer to do things themselves. So that book would take you through the process of finding and negotiating your own lease. So that's it. Do we have any questions, Sheila?
We sure do. We got a couple.
Okay.
First comes from Tracy. She heard that there are some federal or local programs specifically for landlords to apply to their tenants to defer. Is this true?
I have not seen that. The PPP program for the companies like me and you has rent in there as being able to get that, but I don't know if I haven't seen that or heard that about the landlords. What I think some landlords are doing is they're going to their lenders and asking for time. But honestly, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. And then Barry had a question. He is in an executive office suite like Americenter or Regis or some of the co-working spaces. How do you work with that? With a landlord and Barry, am I saying that correctly? How do you work with being within one of those kind of companies or office spaces?
It's pretty much the same process. I mean, I'm in an executive suite. Again, it's the same thing. Pull your lease, see what they're willing to do. Like I said, my Regis gave me 2 months free rent. I'm not really sure why they did. Maybe they don't want me to leave. I'm not sure. So I would just approach them. The other thing I would do is if they're in a national, like a Regis or a WeWorks, I would contact the people at the front desk, but I would also go online and contact corporate. If you're in WeWorks, I don't know what you're going to do. I think they're having real big financial trouble.
Any other questions? Anyone? All right, well, it looks like those might be it for questions. I will be emailing out Lynn's information after the PowerPoint presentation. So if you have any specific questions, I'm sure you can reach out to her and ask. As I mentioned, keep an eye on troychamber.com. Lots of great events coming up. A lot of great information on what's happening in the community, the state. And thank you again for being part of the chamber and being part of this meeting this morning. And with that, Tracy, if you want to open up, if anyone wants to chat, feel free.
Everybody's unmuted now.
And generally they make it up over the course of the remaining month of the year.
No questions.
All right.
I had a question for Lynn. Lynn, are you still there?
When I
Yes, I'm here.
there was no guidance from the federal government.
Lynn, I was wondering, are you in a better position if
I never
you
signed
have-
it.
Hello?
I called him and told him like, hey,
I'm not sure who that is, trying to mute.
Okay. Lynn, are you in a better position if you have a long-term lease than if your lease is going to be up soon? Where do you have a better shot at doing this?
I think it's one dependent on the landlord and their financial ability, but more than likely, if you have a super long lease like this, the landlord's more likely to work with you because you're basically their VIP, right? You're a very important business to them.
Okay, so when you're negotiating these kind of things, is it more typical that you negotiate to add on to the end of the lease? Is that what typically people are talking about, or paying off different amounts over time?
What we're seeing that's working is extending the term of the lease by the amount of free rent, if you're in a long-term lease.
Okay, thank you. Sorry,
Anyone else?
big question.
That's okay.
That's okay. That's okay.
All right.
The other thing, any other
Go ahead.
questions? I was going to say, you know, the future of like office space is kind of interesting. We've heard some of the changes and what kind of the future office space they're talking about is that half the workers will work from home for 2 weeks and then come in, and they keep switching off. So half in the office at all times, because you're going to need to keep that 6-foot distancing. They're also saying that if this virus comes back in the fall, there may be some changes in how your office can be laid out. So the office spaces are going to be bigger, or if you're in a private offices, you're fine. But if you have open spaces, you probably need to be putting up some acrylic between the spaces so that, you know, no germs go through, and they're going to have to be further apart. So like if you are working in a building and it's all cubicles, probably you're going to have like every other cubicle a person sitting in. So what they're predicting in this moment is that the tenants won't need more office space, but they'll have less people in the same office space. That's kind of one of the things that they're saying.
Fascinating.
Okay.
All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, we can let you guys get back to work early. Again, I will be emailing everything out within the next couple of hours, and we appreciate your time. And Lynn, thank you so much for doing this for our group. We so appreciate it.
Thank you. I
Thanks,
appreciate
Lynn.
you guys. Let
Thank
me
you,
do
Lynn.
this. Thanks.
Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Happy Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.